Let's take a look at the fastest way to solve this GRE quant question that's relating to circles. Notice we don't have multiple choice answers to choose from. Can make this question slightly more difficult, but keeping our work organized, we're going to be okay. First thing we need is to remember our circumference formula, which is 2 pi r. We also need to remember our area of a circle formula, which is pi r squared. All right, let's analyze what we have in our question. Circumference of A is 5 times the circumference of B. Now, since it doesn't give me any information about either of these, I need to plug in my own numbers to help me keep this straight. So I'm going to look at circumference A, and I'm also going to look at the circumference of B. So let's start with B, recognizing that it's the smaller one. And let's pretend for a minute that the circumference of B is 4 pi. So if A is 5 times more, when we multiply by 5 over here, that's going to tell us that the circumference of circle A is 20 pi. Now let's solve for radius because we're going to need the radius in order to determine our area. So coming back to circle B, if we know that 2 pi r is equal to 4 pi, and we divide both of these by 2 pi, that's going to solve for r, so we know r is 2. So then if we look at area, area is pi r squared, so that means that it's pi times 2 squared, which is 4 pi. Fantastic. Now I'm going to come over here and do my circumference for A. And we've got 2 pi r equal to 20 pi. I'm going to divide by 2 pi again in order to solve for my r, and I'm going to get 10 here. All right, so then if I go pi r squared for my area, I'm going to get 100 pi. So now what's the relationship for me between 100 pi and 4 pi? How many times is that area? So in order to solve this, we're going to come through and we're going to take 100 pi, divide that by our smaller one of 4 pi, and we are indeed left with 25 as my answer. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what we did here. Since we don't have the circumference of either one, and since we need the radius in order to be able to solve, I need to plug in my own numbers to make this math concrete rather than thinking hypothetical. So a couple things I wanted to keep in mind in terms of how I was going to plug in. I needed a number that I could easily multiply by 5. 4 times 5 giving me 20. Those are still reasonable to work with, but I also needed it to be an even number because I wanted a whole integer, not a decimal or a fraction, when I divided by that 2 pi in order to get my radius. I could have set my circumference up to be like 5 pi, but then I'd get really messy when it gets down to that radius. So we want to think about the relationship in the question. I need to divide by 2 pi in order to solve for my radius, and then we're going to come through and multiply by 5. I could have used any other numbers here as well too. I could have set this up to be 10 pi, which would have given me 50 pi over here. So as long as we're coming through and multiplying by that 5 times to move from B to A, the math is always going to work on this. But these are two very important formulas that you must have memorized. Circumference, again, the distance around 2 pi r. We also need to remember that technically when we're looking at that circle, our radius is half of our diameter. So our circumference can also be written as pi times our diameter. We need to be ready to interchange that and understand our circle terminology.